Well, we today are going to be covering, we did spiritual gifts already, the heart or the passions in ministry, your natural abilities, things that you find driving and energizing for you. Last week we did some personality look. This week and next week we're going to be doing some look at life experiences. And this is really something that is super unique because your life experience doesn't totally dictate, but it has a very strong impact on how you will minister and to whom you will minister. You'll have things that are part of that thing back in the heart that are tied into your life story that just make a connection that is just hard to explain any other way except that you have a connection there. This little section will be 100% unique to you. It will be literally like your fingerprint. When you think about it, no one else in this room has your life. Even if you're married, you've shared a lot of life together. Your experience of the marriage is different. And nobody else has your DNA. Nobody else has your life history, your family history. Even if you had your brother and sister in here, there was a different birth order. And your experience of your parents may be vastly different than someone else's, experience of the parent. So birth order, there's all kinds of things, relationships and decisions and things that go on. So now to this point, when we've looked at the first parts of the shape, minus the E, these are things that we've worded very carefully. These are God-empowered or God-given gifts. When we get to life experiences, there's a little bit of a twist. And the way I like to word it is these are God-permitted things that happen in our lives that shape us. Not everything that happened in your life is a gift in the sense of, oh, this was God's will and it was just wonderful that it happened. There are plenty of things that either through your decisions or things that happen to you that are very difficult to say, this is God's gift, but it was God permitted for whatever reason. Now let me walk out just a few of these kind of things. Chris, if y'all will get some of those right up there, that'd be great. So think about decisions. Some of the decisions that you have made, your decisions, were either really great decisions. They could have been very just simply unwise decisions. It's hard to call it sinful, but maybe just unwise. And then there's some that could have just been outright, I was rebelling. God told me to go one way, I did the other, I pulled a Jonah, and it just was a really bad decision. Some decisions, typically starting earlier in life and then progressing through teenage and early adulthood, if you make those decisions enough, they become formed into patterns, habits, and depending on what kind they are, it can be addictions. And so there's some things there that might come to the surface. There have been some that have had sins done, every one of us to some extent have had sins done to us. It can be outright abuse, and there's a zillion different ways to define abuse nowadays, from mental, emotional, sexual, spiritual abuse. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. There's a lot of them. It can be neglect. It can be just a decision that happened beyond your ability that was not necessarily wrong. It was just for you unpleasant. For example, if you're in 7th grade and your parents move and you've got to start totally over the new set of friends, that's not right or wrong. It's just the new way of life, and that may have really been at a crucial time in your life and put you on some different trajectories. And this can be true for going off to college and, several other places where that can happen. Things that we typically put as negatives, if you've had a divorce in your background, some people say it's a mixed bag. Some would say it's the best thing that ever happened because it was such a bad situation. Others would say it was horrible. A death of a child, death of a spouse, death of someone that was very close to you, could be very a defining moment. But I do want you to think for a moment, so much of your life experience, there are some things you just simply have no control over, like none. For example, you did not get to choose your parents. They didn't check with you before they had you. They couldn't have. You didn't get any choice on your siblings or the number of your siblings. Rarely do parents take a family poll and then decide, should we have another one or not, and let the kids decide. I mean, it's just not your call, not your decision. You had no choice in your hometown. Anybody here growing up in a town of less than 1,000 people? Okay. How many of you grew up in something about 20,000 or so? Okay. Daniel, did you raise your hand at that point? Because Owasso was when you grew up. It's changed a little since then. How many of you grew up in something over 100,000 or larger? Okay. All right. So that alone, you didn't have any choice where your parents were going to live, and that impacted you. And the feel of a 1,000 size city and the feel of 100,000 size or 1,000,000 or whatever is way different. Your experience will be way different. I grew up in Abilene, Texas, about, back in the day between 80 and now it's probably 120. But we lived in a good neighborhood, and I was raised by wolves down at the local creek. I mean, it was just one of those places. Your parents were totally free in a different time in history when they'd turn you loose and you'd show up at dark. And my mom literally would hose me off in the backyard and then make me strip down to my underwear and just to come inside, because I just sometimes came home completely filthy. But I had a great time. That's how I got my immune system where it did. You do not have, do what? Yeah. Crawdads and all that kind of fun stuff. Do what?
Right? It changes you.
Yeah. I noodled before I even knew what noodling was, man.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. You have no choice on your ethnicity.
Yeah.
For whatever choice, your nationality. And it's interesting that tonight Mohammed is here, born in Turkey.
I was born in Michigan.
You were born in Michigan.
Man.
But he's from Turkey.
But you're from Turkey, right?
Yeah, I raised in Turkey. Like
Merhaba efendim.
not a lot.
So, 20 years, how old are you now, roughly?
I'm 30.
30, so 2/3 of your life was spent in Turkey.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, very good.
I lived in Ankara
Okay.
on Tanala Helmi Boulevard. In Ankara. I lived in Ankara.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
From Istanbul.
Oh, in
but
Istanbul.
My most of the family are in Ankara.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I worked in
Okay. Anybody have their childhood in another country? Which one?
Ecuador.
Ecuador.
Oh, wow.
Hawaii felt like a
Ecuador.
different country.
I did. I had one too.
Okay.
South Louisiana.
That is another language. That's a totally language group. That's a.
Yeah.
Here's another thing you had no choice on: your genetics.
That's true.
Nothing. Did you have any choice on that? I mean, when you talk about the sovereign hand of God, for whatever reason, you got what you have, and some of us have genetic dispositions towards certain things. Some things you'd say are wonderful, some things are not. It's just part of your life. If you're born with a tendency towards hypertension or diabetes, or thinking about my son Jonathan, he has what's called horseshoe kidney or connected kidneys. We didn't even know it until he had a major infection one time and they figured it out. But it's just, everybody's got something quirky. So I don't know what yours are, but I'm sure you have it. How about this one? You had no choice on your socioeconomic, at least formative years. And you may still feel like I don't have any choice. But, if you grew up in a poor family, middle class, wealthy family, your experience is going to be different than someone who didn't. I was just talking to somebody the other day from our church, and it was one of the ladies, and she grew up very, very poor in North Tulsa. She's got a totally different understanding about certain things than other people do who didn't grow up in that kind of environment. It's not right and wrong. I mean, again, you don't have any choice. These things just, what you call, happen to us. Every now and then you're going to find something in your life story that I don't even know what to call it, and so don't get mad at me when I use this phrase, luck. It's bad luck or good luck, you know. It's just stuff that it's hard to explain, like, why did that accident happen? How did something get in the wrong time at the wrong place that I happened to be there at that wrong time and wrong place? Or right time, right place? There's going to be some of those stories and parts of your life that you need to be aware of. Now, what are some of the good things that can also be a part of your heritage? Maybe you do get good genetics. Maybe you have parents who were really strong believers, and that alone was a huge factor in your life. Maybe you had a really strong church or youth group. I know my youth group camps experiences in particular were very impactful over the years for my spiritual formation. Maybe your family was very financially stable and you didn't have to wonder where the meal's going to come from next. I won't mention this person by name. They're no longer a member of our church years ago, but there was a lady that grew up in a semi-unstable, impoverished family situation, and her reaction to that was she could never have a pantry that was empty now. It created anxiety for her to have just even a few open spaces in her pantry. So she always had food in the fridge and in the pantry and the freezer because she was afraid it would run out. And, you know, it's just life experience that brought her to that point. If you've had very good friendships, that's a big positive. Maybe you had a really quality, good education, and that can impact you and make a part of your life story. So there's just a lot of things that are involved here. The one thing that I would say is important when we look at life experiences, God does not waste a life experience. Now, they may have been hard, but they can still be useful for Him and His purposes for your life. If you don't believe me, just go read the Old Testament Joseph story really well. And you're going to see a guy that, you know, through no fault of his own, his brothers hated his guts, was sold as a slave, was falsely accused of sexual harassment, which he did not do. It was actually the other way around. He was thrown in prison for a couple of years through no fault of his own. And I mean, he was forgotten. All of his friends said, "Hey, yeah, we'll remember you when we get out," and they didn't. I mean, it was just, but by the time you get to the end of the story, God elevated him to second only to Pharaoh, and he could have the testimony, what you guys meant for evil, God meant for good. And he had the mature perspective on his own life experiences, not to become bitter by them, but see, you know, the hand of God is still at work through all of these things. So we do need to be able to look at our lives to make a Christ-centered assessment, a fair assessment, an honest assessment of these things, including the good and the bad. And when it comes to ministry, there's going to be certain things that you have gone through, again, good or bad, that allow you a unique entry point to speak into other people's lives that had you not had that experience, you would not have that entry point. And I'm just going to pull this out, not picking on anybody, but you know what Mark has gone through recently with the loss of his wife. He's meeting with a guy named Dave Willits, who, how many years ago has it been now? 15, 20, 18 years ago, lost his wife and daughter in an automobile accident. So when Mark's trying to talk to him about, I've lost my wife, this guy knows what Mark's going through. So there's those kinds of things that Dave would not, he was a great pastor, a good guy, but this takes him to another level of ministry. Not a good experience. Hard to say, boy, I'm so glad that happened, but it does open the door. He now has a ministry to grieving people. He does teaching. He works with a hospice group. He does counseling and is really involved in things. It turned the course of his life by a difficult event. Again, I won't use names on this one, but I know that there are people in our church who have gone through the hard work of working through addiction problems, and they are now able to help other people who go through addiction problems because they've walked in enough sobriety to be able to speak intelligently to what's going on. You know, if you've never had an addiction problem, probably everybody has, if you're honest. It just, some of them are more legal than others. You know, maybe you have an Oreo cookie addiction and no one's going to, arrest you for that one. But if it's an addiction, it's an addiction. But there's just ways that you can kind of work your way through these things that are helpful. Same can be true for divorced people. Sometimes can minister to people who are going through a divorce or have recently had one, that someone who's married can express compassion, but they're not going to be able to really speak a heart language at that level that the other person can. So Christian business people, if you've got a business, you're able, I'm thinking about NATO here just because he said employees a few weeks ago as part of his heart. But when you think about Christian business people are able to talk about business, that if someone doesn't have their own business, it's hard to talk on the same level. But if someone came to you and said, tell me about your business model, and it's like, man, you're on it. You can relate at a level that's deep and it's meaningful and impactful. So now when we think about life experiences biblically, I don't know if you're aware how little we really know about Jesus. If you think about, if we were trying to do a timeline, I mean, we've got birth to what? Age 2, maybe 3, and even that's got a lot of gaps in it. I mean, he was born, hung out for a couple of years in Nazareth, and actually Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and then with the Herod deal, at age 2-ish, he disappears in Europe and ends up back in Nazareth. We don't hear about him again until he's 12 years old, have one story at age 12, and then nothing until he's 30 years old. It's hard to call that an autobiography or a biography. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot that we presume. He is known as the carpenter, but boy, how long was he a carpenter? Was he any good? You ever thought about that? What if Jesus is just okay? We always think, man, he was the Son of God. He could just do this and it'd be, a perfectly planed a piece of lumber. And it's like, I don't think he cheated. So, maybe when he said did he say his own name with his finger? I don't know. Anyway, that was a joke. Y'all will figure that out later. What in the name of me are you? Thank you. Now, the same is true. There's a few big guys that we have more information on than others, like Moses. We know some of his story, but really when you start really thinking about it, there's big gaps in their life story. And it's hard to say much. This Abraham, the apostles, we really don't know until we pick up their storyline. We don't know what Peter or Judas's childhood was like, or James and John, other than that they grew up in a fisherman's home. There's just a lot we don't know.
Yeah, Melchizedek.
Yeah, that's a really tough one to do the family tree on, isn't it? No kidding. Now, the one guy in the Bible that we probably have the most information on life experience-wise is King David. There's actually a significant amount of material, more than any other person. I don't know if you ever realize that. So I'm going to just kind of give some time frames and you guys kind of talk through it. Let's just do, what do we know about his formative years? What do we know about his family life? He was the youngest of
12?
No, there was 8 total. There were 7 older brothers. Now think about that. 7 older brothers. Do you think you grew up a little bit tough in that kind of environment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry
Okay.
about there with the bears and the lions. You'll
Yeah.
be okay.
Yeah. What do we know about his family tree? We know which tribe he's from. That's a pretty big one, Judah. But what else do we know about his family tree? Boaz, and who is she? Ruth.
The
Okay, so
Moabites.
we start thinking about this. Moabite blood. How's that for some genetic interesting stuff? Who else is in the family tree that's kind of unique?
Rahab.
Rahab married Salmon, and she's probably Canaanite blood. So in David's, if we were like Native Americans, he'd be like 132nd in a lot of things. You're just kind of like, interesting. He's not just this, I guess you would call it lily white Jewish person, but a pure 100% Hebrew stock. He had actually a lot of interesting genetics that could have helped him be the little freak show that he was. What do we know about his body? Always says he's good looking,
Ruddy?
but ruddy. And what does ruddy mean?
Like reddish?
He was a redhead. Imagine, you're the redhead of 7 older brothers, and I bet they thumped him a lot for being the redhead. I'm just, going through there. We know in his formative years, very early, he was forced to be the family shepherd. Even when Samuel shows up, for the anointing of someone in the family, everybody else is at the house, but David was out. And Samuel's like, you know what, we're not going to eat till everybody's here. And they're just kind of like, it's just David. Of course, it ended up being David that got the anointing. So, David now, as a young shepherd, what did he learn? What do we know about that?
Worship.
Okay, he was alone.
Courage.
He worshiped. He had insane courage. When he's fighting Goliath, what is he saying happened in his earlier shepherding years? Whenever a lion came, I would grab it by the beard and beat the crap out of it until it died. Sorry, the French,
Pretty much.
but I'm just trying to keep it real. And did the same with a bear. A kid fighting a major predator. That little redhead had some stuff. I think this is where he learned his slingshotting business. Bored kid, I can see this. Bored kid out there watched a bunch of sheep, and the only thing he's got is a stick and a slingshot. Guess who figured out how to split a hair with a rock, which came in real handy when it was time to go after Goliath. Life experience paid off. Now, he still had to have the courage to run to Goliath and show up on the scene, but he had already been well equipped for a lot of stuff. As a shepherd growing up, he learned hardship, deprivations, sleeping outside, having to figure out where water and food and all this is. That came in kind of handy when he was on the run from Saul, most of his younger adult life. He was on the run constantly, but he'd already been prepared for that too. So his life experiences are starting to gear him towards certain things. Now, what do we know about? We know he was musical. He could have picked that up out shepherding. He picked it up somewhere. We're not sure where. But at an early age, he was good enough, maybe a musical prodigy, that King Saul heard about this young kid who can play and has David come to stay in the castle, in the palace, that when he gets this evil spirit, probably depression or something that comes on him, he has this kid come out and start playing the harp. Well, that comes in handy when you're writing Psalms later. And he's just, I don't know if his mother made him take harp lessons. You know, how many kids just like, my mom made me take piano lessons. Mark, was that your experience? No, you chose to do that? You liked piano? Eventually. Okay. And that's my point.
And was his mom mother of all 8 boys?
We believe so. And he, trying to remember, it's his dad's sister, I believe, was Zeruiah, that had Joab and the other ones. But it's really interesting that it's a female that is always described as the parental figure for his 3 cousins who were animal warriors. So it makes you kind of wonder what mom was like. And it makes you wonder, what was a family reunion like? You've got 8 boys and you've got 3 warriors over here. They just get together, probably traded hits. And you laugh. But I know, many of y'all know Stephen Whitaker, the Whitaker clan that works John 3:16. Growing up for Thanksgiving, this was their idea of fun. They'd clean all the furniture out of the living room and then fight. They were all expert martial artists. And they'd sit there and just beat each other up for fun. And you think, who does that? Warriors do that. And guess what? There's not been too many people mess with the guy's John 3:16 mission when you've got a Stephen Sr. and a Stephen Jr. Whitaker that are overseeing the place. I mean, can you imagine what? Ooh. That would not go well. That would just not go well. So, we all know the Goliath story. What's some of the life events that happened to David after Goliath? He's famous. Saul is slain his thousands, David is tens of thousands, and then what happens? I'm going to buy you guys a Bible. I promise you I'm going to buy you guys a Bible.
He and Jonathan become very close.
Jonathan and he become friends.
Not that great a dad.
Well, we haven't got to dad yet, because what do you have to be a dad? A
He got
wife.
married.
Who did he get married to? His first wife.
Saul's daughter.
Micah, Saul's daughter. So he goes from being dirt poor, farm boy, to being in the palace in favored position, which is where he gets to meet Jonathan and get a lot of cool stuff going on. Just for fun, does anybody remember what his dowry was that he paid?
Really?
Huh?
Yeah.
It was Philistine.
It was Philistine, and he doubled down. I think Saul asked for 100 and he brought 200. That's the kind of guy David was, an overachiever. Now, after he gets into this mess with Saul,
What do they do with those?
Yeah.
Really?
necklaces,
Oh.
sell them at the market.
Oh.
Don't buy stuff at the market. Now, once things turn bad with Saul, he is persecuted. Like I said, his 20s, probably into his 30s, he spent life on the lam. And hard life. He gathers about him. Anybody remember what these 600 guys are described as? Malcontents. Guys who couldn't pay their rent. Bunch of guys that are having a hard life, and he just collects these guys.
I think we call them rednecks.
They would be, something like that. But think about it. He is a leader, and he can't help but gathering people because he's a leader. And the guys he gets are the toughest little suckers you will probably find in the Bible. They had for fun on a snowy day, let's jump into a pit and fight a lion. That was their idea of fun. It's kind of like the Whitakers, hey, let's clear out the furniture and fight. Except they'd say, let's throw a lion in the mix. What could go wrong? These are tough guys. And David somehow managed them beautifully because they never revolted. And they were his core group that got him through.
There was that one time.
Well, they complained.
They wanted to kill him.
Yeah, but he rallied them back and
Yeah.
they went after the bad guys. Ziglag, I think, somewhere maybe?
Yep.
Okay. Now we get into his adult life. He starts collecting wives. You know, he had to get rid of Micah because he was on the run. And then he ends up with maybe 6, 8 wives. I can't remember what the number is, but more than he should have had. And that starts creating problems, which makes all the more crazy the story about Bathsheba. You've got wives. Why are you going out and, I mean, it's just one of those things you just kind of go, you talk about a guy getting stupid in midlife, he just gets really stupid. And it's a defining moment, not so much the Bathsheba, which was bad, the killing of her husband is what Scripture says was really he shed innocent blood, and it was like that he could never wash that off. And it just, from that point on, this is when the family just tanks. His fatherhood, his capacities it just tank. His leadership, he's always at this point fighting rebellions within the kingdom. It's just chaos in his latter years. And anyway, as you can tell, there's a lot of information in Scripture about David. But it's interesting to see these themes of leadership, of warrior, of musical poet, of truly anointed, just able to do stuff that doesn't seem like anybody else could do. And when you look at the story, it goes, oh, it makes sense how he gets where he is. And it's interesting that of all those things, Jesus, more than any other person in the Old Testament, is identified as the Son of David. So, I don't know what all that means, but it is interesting that shows up. So, we're going to spend a few minutes working through the worksheet that you have. And I want you to, most of these answers should come quite quickly. Like your birth order and, religious environment growing up. You can say had none, went to church, 3 times a year, or, we were there every time the doors were open, all that kind of stuff. But most of these things should just unfold quickly. But there's questions related to family of origin, your education background, because that will have an impact on you. Work history, and just kind of I don't need to know the names of the company. You don't need to, it's just what kinds of jobs did you do and that you particularly enjoyed. Culture. How many in here you would be legitimately called bi, tri, or even more lingual? I know Tony is.
1.5.
You can speak Spanish.
Yes.
Or is it English that you're questionable? Okay. So you're clearly bilingual. Okay. Mohammed, you're Turkish and English. Anybody else bilingual?
I speak a little Turkish.
Oh, you.
I can.
Okay.
I said Merhaba.
We will quiz you in joy class on that. Anybody else? Anybody else grew up in I think I already asked about growing up in a different country, but there's a lot of interesting things in culture. Significant connections. This is primarily relationship things. Married or not, divorced or not, children or not. Really important family or friends. Those kind of things. If you're raised by grandparents, that's a significant thing. And then those last questions, y'all don't start filling this out yet. Let me explain these last 3 questions. 3 most significant events in the first half of my life. Please don't put I was born as one of them. Okay, we're going to assume that one. I'm trying to have you narrow down impact things. And it's easy to say, well, I was born, I got married, I had kids, and I had a job, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't have any more significant things. And there's a lot more that are probably life impact that might be worth looking at. Again, these can be positives, they can be negatives. We're talking about things that were significant and significant to you. So, take a few minutes. Let's work on these. Time do we have here?
It says education, you just wanna know where we went to school?
Yeah, where you went to school, and when it talks about where you went to school, I think it's significant to put the town. Again, if it's a small town, if it's a 5A school or a 1A school, that changes things. One room school. I'll give us about 15 minutes here, and then we'll start a new thing as well.